Everyone thinks made in Italy means a master artisan is hand-stitching your handbag in some sun-drenched Florentine workshop. I looked into the factories. I pulled the customs records. I followed the supply chain from raw hide to retail shelf. And what I found doesn't just challenge the label, it dismantles the entire mythology behind it. If you've ever paid a premium because something said, "Made in Italy," this is going to sting. Here's why this matters more to your wallet than almost any other label in fashion right now. The Made in Italy markup isn't 10 or 20%. According to industry sourcing data compiled by supply chain analysts, slapping that phrase on a product can inflate the retail price by 300 to 800% compared to the identical item without it. We're not talking about a modest premium for craftsmanship. We're talking about a geographic marketing tax that entire industries have learned to exploit. And it works because most people never question it. You see those three words, your brain fills in the story. Old world, artisans, generations of tradition, the finest raw materials on the planet. But the gap between that story and reality is where billions of dollars disappear from consumer wallets every single year. And I don't say that to be dramatic. The European fashion sector generates over 700 billion euros annually, and a disproportionate share of that revenue is built on geographic branding, not product quality. I've spent months digging into trade documentation, EU regulatory frameworks, factory audit reports, and sourcing agreements that brands never expected a consumer to actually sit down and read. I talked to a leather buyer in Milan who sources for 3 mid-range brands you'd absolutely recognize. I talked to a retired customs inspector who spent 15 years examining import declarations in Italian ports. And I reviewed independent testing data from material labs that specialize in verifying what products are actually made of versus what the label claims. What I'm about to walk you through are 10 truths the fashion industry prays you never look up. The first 5 will show you exactly how the system is rigged against you. The last 5 will arm you with everything you need to stop getting fleeced and start spending smarter. By the end of this, you'll never look at a country of origin label the same way again. Let's start with the lie most people have never even thought to question. What does Made in Italy actually require by law? Here's where the whole thing unravels. Under European Union customs regulation, a product qualifies as made in Italy if the last substantial transformation occurred on Italian soil. Read that again. The last substantial transformation. Not the majority of production. Not the sourcing of materials. Not even 51% of the labor. The final significant manufacturing step. So a handbag can have its leather cut in Turkey, its hardware cast in China, its lining sewn in Romania, and its body partially assembled in Tunisia. And as long as the final assembly and stitching happens in a facility with an Italian address, it ships with that golden label. According to analysis by Italian customs enforcement agencies, this loophole has been exploited across fashion, furniture, footwear, and even food processing for decades. The law doesn't require what you think it requires, and every brand pricing their products on the prestige of that label knows it. The second truth takes this even further. It's a trick the industry calls imported and finished, and once you understand it, you can't unsee it. A shoe is 90% manufactured in a factory overseas. The upper is lasted. The sole is cemented or stitched on. The shape is formed. It's essentially a finished shoe. Then it gets shipped to a small facility outside Florence or Naples, where someone glues on the insole, stamps the logo onto the leather, does a final polish and quality check, and places it in the branded box. That final step, which might represent 8 to 12 minutes of labor, qualifies it as Italian-made under current regulations. The factory cost for that finishing touch? Based on sourcing documents reviewed by European investigative journalists, often less than €4 per unit. The retail premium that finishing step commands? Anywhere from 150 to 500 euros on top of what the shoe would sell for without the label. You're not paying for Italian craftsmanship. You're paying for an Italian postal code. Now, secret number 3 is the one that shocked even the people inside the industry when it first became widely known. There's a city in Tuscany called Prato. It sits about 20 minutes northwest of Florence, the heart of Italy's fashion mythology. And inside Prado, there are thousands of garment and textile factories. But here's what most consumers have never heard. A significant proportion of these factories are owned and operated by Chinese entrepreneurs who relocated to the region specifically to manufacture goods that legally qualify for the Made in Italy designation. Investigative reports from multiple major European news outlets have documented that many of these workshops operate with imported labor, imported materials, and production methods virtually identical to what you'd find in factories across Guangdong province. The product that comes out of these facilities is technically, legally, made in Italy. But the romantic vision of a Tuscan craftsman you had in your head when you handed over your credit card, it has no connection to what actually made your product. And here's the part that really stings. Some of these operations produce goods for brands that retail at 4 and 5 figures. The consumer is paying luxury prices based on the assumption of artisanal Italian production. The reality is industrial-scale manufacturing that happens to occur within Italian borders. Based on estimates cited by the Prado Chamber of Commerce, this parallel manufacturing economy is worth billions in annual revenue. Billions! Built on a label and a legal technicality that most consumers have never heard of. The fourth truth is about the materials themselves, and this is where the deception gets layered. When you see Italian leather on a product listing, what do you picture? Probably a sun-baked tannery along the Arno River. Maybe vegetable tanned hides being hand-finished by a third-generation artisan. That image sells a lot of products. But the reality, according to supply chain audits and industry sourcing reports, is that a large percentage of leather marketed as Italian actually starts its life as a raw hide in South America, Southeast Asia, or Sub-Saharan Africa. These hides get shipped to tanneries in Italy, processed and finished there, and then legally classified as Italian leather. Now, the processing step matters. Some Italian tanneries genuinely do world-class work, and finishing is a real skill. But the phrase Italian leather has become so commercialized and diluted that on its own, it tells you almost nothing about the actual quality of what you're touching. A $200 bag marketed as premium Italian leather might use the same grade of corrected grain, pigment-coated hide as a $40 bag from a brand that doesn't bother with geographic marketing. I've personally held products side by side where this was the case. Identical hand feel, identical grain pattern, identical thickness. The actual material is comparable. The difference is the story printed on the tag. And that story, depending on which brand is telling it, can cost you an extra $150 that buys you nothing except a feeling. And that leads directly into truth number 5, the markup math. Let's pull this apart together. According to Bill of Materials breakdowns published by fashion industry analysts, a mid-range leather handbag carrying the Made in Italy label typically costs between $30 and $65 to produce, including materials, labor, and factory overhead. That same bag retails for anywhere between $400 and $900. The gross margin sits comfortably above 85%. Now compare that to a comparable bag made in Portugal or Spain, countries with deep, legitimate leather-working traditions and highly skilled labor forces, where the same quality level retails for $150 to $275. The construction is equivalent. The materials are often sourced from the same tanneries. The difference isn't quality. It's 3 words, and the marketing mythology those words carry. You are subsidizing a brand's advertising budget, their influencer campaigns, and their retail real estate every time you choose Made in Italy without verifying what's actually behind it. These are the kind of truths brands spend millions making sure you never stumble across. If this is valuable to you, consider subscribing. We break down the real economics behind the products you buy every single week. Now, here's where it gets useful, because not everything with that label is a lie. Truth number 6. There are brands that genuinely earn the designation, and you need to know how to find them. The real Italian manufacturers, the ones actually worth your money, are almost always vertically integrated. That means they own or directly control their raw material sourcing, their tanneries or textile mills, their cutting and production facilities, and their finishing operations. Everything happens under one roof or within one company's verified supply chain. Brands operating this way typically publish their factory locations openly. They offer workshop tours, or at minimum, detailed production documentation. Based on independent assessments, companies like these represent a relatively small fraction of the total Made in Italy market. But they're the ones actually delivering what the label promises. The red flag you should watch for. Any brand that uses Made in Italy as a marketing headline, but gets vague, defensive, or redirects to generic brand storytelling when you ask where specifically the product was made. Secret number 7. What does real Italian craftsmanship actually look like when you find it? And how do you spot it without a degree in leatherworking? There are specific, observable markers. Hand-painted or burnished edges on leather. Goods, rather than machine-folded or chemically bonded edges that feel plasticky. Linen or waxed thread stitching that creates a subtle texture, rather than nylon thread that looks uniform and cheap under magnification. Vegetable tanned leather with natural color variation and a faint, warm smell rather than uniform. Corrected grain hides coated in pigment that feel like vinyl. Solid brass or Zamak alloy hardware with real weight, rather than hollow pot metal with electroplating chips within months. According to artisan guilds in regions like Marche and Veneto, these physical details are exactly what separate a $600 product that's genuinely worth the investment from a $600 product that's worth $60 and a marketing deck. The difference is visible and tactile, if you know where to direct your attention. Now you do. Truth number 8 is about certifications. Specifically, which ones carry weight, and which ones are just decorative stamps designed to make you stop questioning. There's a certification called 100% Made in Italy, administered by the Istituto per la Tutela dei Produttori Italiani. This one actually requires a documentation proving that the entire production cycle, from raw materials through finishing, occurs within Italy using Italian supply chains. It's significantly harder to earn than the standard Made in Italy label. There's also the Vera Pelle mark, which certifies genuine leather composition, though it tells you about material authenticity, not geographic origin. On the other hand, many brands create their own in-house quality certifications, proprietary badges, and logos that mean absolutely nothing outside their own marketing department. If a certification isn't issued by a recognized independent third party with published auditing standards, treat it as marketing material wearing a costume. Based on regulatory analysis, fewer than 15% of products carrying the Made in Italy designation in fashion hold any independently verified production certification. The rest are operating purely on consumer trust. And as we've now established, that trust has been systematically monetized. Secret number 9 comes down to price floors, and this might be the single most practical piece of information in this entire video. If someone is selling you a Made in Italy leather jacket for under $300, the math simply doesn't support the claim. Italian labor rates for skilled garment workers sit between 15 and 25 euros per hour, based on published Italian labor statistics. A properly constructed leather jacket requires somewhere between 12 and 20 hours of skilled cutting, stitching, and finishing labor. Add the cost of quality full-grain leather, which alone can run 60 to 120 euros for a jacket's worth, plus hardware, lining fabric, and factory overhead, and the absolute production floor for a legitimately Italian-made leather jacket lands around $250 to $320 at wholesale. That's before any retail margin. So when you see a brand advertising one for $199 with a Made in Italy tag, ask yourself what part of that equation they're lying about. Either the labor isn't Italian, the materials aren't what they claim, the construction cuts corners you can't see yet, or the label is doing the work that the product itself cannot. And that brings us to truth number 10, the smarter way to shop, starting today. Forget the label entirely. I'm serious. Stop letting 3 words on a tag replace your critical thinking. Instead, develop a quick mental checklist before you spend. Does the brand disclose the specific factory, or at minimum the production region? Transparency correlates with legitimacy more reliably than any other signal. What are the actual materials? Not premium leather. That phrase is legally meaningless. You want the tannery name, the leather grade, the tanning method. Is the construction quality visible to the naked eye? Can you see clean stitching, properly finished edges, substantial hardware? Quality doesn't need to hide behind tissue paper and a dust bag. Does the price make mathematical sense, given what you now know about material and labor costs? If it seems impossibly cheap for Italian-made goods, your instincts are correct. And finally, are there independent teardowns or enthusiast reviews available? Cobbler forums, Reddit leather communities, and independent review channels will tell you more about a product in 5 minutes than a brand's entire website ever will. The brands that survive scrutiny from these communities are the ones actually delivering value. The ones that get torn apart, sometimes, literally, are the ones hiding behind a label. So here's what all of this really comes down to. Made in Italy isn't inherently a scam. Italy genuinely has some of the most talented artisans, most sophisticated tanneries, and most meticulous manufacturers anywhere in the world. The tradition is real, the skill is real, the heritage is absolutely real. And the artisans who have dedicated their entire lives to their craft, the ones actually doing hand stitching and vegetable tanning and edge painting, they deserve to be paid fairly for work that takes decades to master. The tragedy is that the very label meant to protect and promote their work has been co-opted by brands that have nothing to do with that tradition. The label, those 3 words stamped on a tag, has been so thoroughly industrialized, so legally hollowed out, and so aggressively weaponized as a pricing tool that it no longer reliably tells you anything about what you're actually buying. It's become a shortcut. And in an industry built entirely on margins, shortcuts always benefit the seller more than the buyer. The brands exploiting this know exactly what they're doing. They've studied consumer psychology. They know that made in Italy triggers an emotional response that bypasses your rational analysis. You stop asking questions. You stop comparing prices. You stop examining stitching. You stop calculating whether the cost of materials and labor could possibly justify the number on the price tag. You just pay, and that's the real scam. Not that the label is always false, but that it's been deliberately engineered to make you stop thinking at the exact moment you should be thinking the hardest. Here's what I want you to take away from this. You don't need to boycott Italian-made goods. You don't need to assume every brand is lying. What you need to do is treat Made in Italy the same way you'd treat any other marketing claim, as something that requires verification, not blind trust. Ask for the factory location. Check the materials. Do the price math. Look for independent certifications. Read the enthusiast reviews. The brands that are doing it right will welcome every one of those questions. It's the ones that can't answer them that you need to walk away from. Now you know what to look for. Now you know what questions to ask. And now you know that a label is never, ever a substitute for your own judgment. The information asymmetry that brands relied on for decades, the gap between what they know about their products and what you know, that gap just got a lot smaller. If this changes how you'll think about what you buy, drop the brand. That surprised you most in the comments. The conversations down there are often just as valuable as the video itself. And if you want more breakdowns like this, where we pull back the curtain on industries that are quietly overcharging you, hit subscribe. We've got a lot more to uncover.